The letter was sitting on top of my work boots when I got home that Tuesday night. Not slipped under the door, not left on the kitchen counter, on top of my boots. Like whoever put it there wanted to make sure I couldn't miss it. I remember standing in the hallway, still wearing my jacket, reading it twice because the first time didn't fully land. 60 days. Apex. No, sorry. The building management company, Stonebridge Property Group, had sold the entire complex to a development firm, and every tenant had 60 days to vacate. My girlfriend, Claire, came out of the kitchen holding a dish towel, and she knew from my face before I even said a word. "How bad?" she asked. I handed her the letter. She read it, folded it slowly along the crease, and set it on the kitchen counter. Then she picked up her spatula and went back to stirring whatever was on the stove, because that's the kind of person Claire is. She doesn't fall apart in the moment. She waits until later, when she thinks I'm asleep. I heard her crying at 2 a.m. that night. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. We'd been renting that apartment in Columbus for 4 years. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a kitchen that got too hot in the summer, and a radiator that clicked all winter like it was counting down to something. But it was ours. The walls had our picture frames. The second bedroom had the desk where Claire graded her students' papers. We knew which floorboard creaked. We knew the mailman's name was Boyd, and that he came at 11:15 every weekday without fail. Now we had 60 days and a rental market that had lost its mind. I worked construction management at the time, site supervisor for a mid-size contractor based out of Westerville. Claire taught 4th grade at a public school in Hilliard. Between us, we made a decent living, but decent doesn't go far when a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood starts at $2,100 a month and requires first month, last month, and a security deposit up front. We had savings, but not stack it on the table savings. We had a modest emergency fund and 2 car payments, and Claire's student loans still hanging around like an uninvited house guest. We spent the first 3 weeks looking at apartments. Every evening after dinner, laptops open at the kitchen table, Zillow and Apartments.com and Facebook Marketplace, and tips from coworkers. We toured 7 places. 3 of them had already been rented by the time we called back. 2 of them had roaches. One of them smelled like something had died in the walls, and the landlord insisted, with a straight face, that it was just old house smell. The 7th one was fine. It was also $2,350 a month, which meant we'd be draining our savings to cover move-in costs and then spending the next year financially holding our breath. Claire said we should take it. I told her to give me 1 more week. That 1 more week was when I found the listing. It showed up on a county property auction site that my buddy at work, a guy named Pete who flipped houses on weekends, had told me to check months ago when I was half listening. I'd bookmarked it and forgotten about it entirely until I was up at midnight, couldn't sleep, scrolling on my phone with the blue light making my eyes hurt. County tax delinquency auction. A 1.4-acre property in a rural township about 40 minutes southeast of Columbus in Fairfield County. A house on it, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, built 1962. The photos were taken on what appeared to be an overcast day in late fall, with half the siding missing from the west wall and the front porch sagging like a tired old man's shoulders. The yard was entirely overgrown. There was what looked like a collapsed outbuilding in the back. The opening bid was $14,000. I woke Claire up. She looked at my phone screen with one eye open, then both eyes, then she sat up. "Is it condemned?" she asked. "Listing doesn't say so. Is it on a floodplain?" "I don't know yet." "What county?" "Fairfield." She took my phone and zoomed in on the photos one by one. She was quiet for a long time. Then she handed it back and said, "Let's go look at it before we do anything crazy." We drove out there on a Saturday morning. The GPS took us down a state route, and then a county road, and then a gravel lane that showed up on the Maps app but looked, in real life, like it might have been meant for tractors. The house sat at the end of it, set back from the lane by about 80 yards. Mostly hidden by a stand of old oak and sycamore trees until you were almost on top of it. When we got out of the car, neither of us said anything for a minute. It was worse than the photos. The porch was not just sagging, but partially collapsed on the left side. Two of the three upstairs windows were boarded. There was a gutter hanging off the roofline at a 45-degree angle. Someone had spray-painted something on the foundation block near the southeast corner, though the weeds had grown up high enough that I couldn't make out the words. An older man in a canvas jacket was leaning against a truck parked on the grass. He introduced himself as the county's property officer, there to let us walk through. His name was Mr. Beckett. He had the air of a man who had shown a lot of distressed properties to a lot of hopeful people and watched most of them drive away without making a bid. "She's been sitting empty for 6 years," he said, unlocking the front door. "Previous owner passed without a will. Estate got tied up. Nobody paid the taxes. County took it last year. The inside smelled like mildew and cold ash and thyme. The carpet in the living room had buckled and turned the color of old dishwater. The kitchen had a ceiling stain shaped like Florida. The one bathroom had a cracked toilet tank and a vanity mirror that had separated from the wall on one side and leaned out at an angle. But the bones were there. I could see it the way you can see it when you've spent years on job sites and learned how to look past the surface. The load-bearing walls were solid. The floor joists, where I could see them through a gap in the kitchen subfloor, looked like they hadn't rotted. The stone fireplace in the main room was massive and clearly hand-laid, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't find anymore, and it looked structurally intact. Claire stood in the middle of the living room with her arms crossed and her jaw set in the way that meant she was running numbers in her head. "What would we need to do to make it livable?" she asked me. "Roof first. That's non-negotiable. Then I'd want to pull all the old drywall, check the insulation, redo the electric if it needs it, probably replumb the bathroom. Kitchen's rough but workable. The porch I can rebuild myself over a summer timeline. If I call in some favors and do a lot of it myself on weekends. 6 months to get it livable, a year to get it right." She looked up at the stained ceiling for a long time. Then she looked at me. "Bid on it," she said. "We won the auction at $18,500. We wired the money to the county clerk's office the following Thursday. We owned a house that looked like a strong wind might have opinions about it, but ours. The first month was just demolition and assessment. I'd come out on weekends and sometimes take a Friday off, and Claire would come when she could. We rented a dumpster and filled it twice with old carpet, blown insulation, stripped drywall, and 40 years' worth of miscellaneous debris left by people I'd never know. We found 3 generations of wallpaper in the main bedroom. Floral from the 80s over geometric from the 60s over something that was probably original to the house. We found a coffee can in the kitchen wall that had $14.30 in it, mostly dimes. We found a child's shoe under the bathroom floorboards, a single saddle shoe, brown and white, size 6, that had no business being there and offered no explanation for how it had gotten there. We'd been at it for about 6 weeks when I noticed the wall. I was in the main room, measuring for new baseboards. The fireplace sits in the middle of the house on the north wall. It's a big structure, full stone from hearth to ceiling, with a mantel made from a single piece of oak. On either side of the fireplace, the wall extends about 4 feet before hitting the corner and turning into the hallway. I'd measured the room from outside. 43 feet, east to west, along the north foundation wall. But inside, measuring from the east wall to the west wall of the main room, I was getting 38 feet, 5 feet unaccounted for. I stood there and looked at the fireplace. A fireplace is not 5 feet wide. This one was maybe 4 feet across the face of it, and the hearth projected about 2 feet into the room. But even accounting for the stone structure and the chimney chase, the math wasn't adding up. I knocked on the wall to the right of the fireplace. Solid. I knocked on the wall to the left. Also solid, but different. A flatter, more hollow sound, like knocking on a door versus knocking on a thick beam. I went outside and stood at the north wall of the house, counted my steps from the east corner to where the chimney emerged from the roofline, came back in and counted again from the inside corner to the fireplace face. There were 4.5 feet between the inside corner and the fireplace face that I couldn't account for from the inside. Claire was in the kitchen. I called her in and showed her the numbers. She listened to the explanation and then walked to the left wall of the fireplace and put her hand flat on the plaster. "So this isn't a wall," she said. "I think this is a room," I said. She looked at me. "Why would someone build a hidden room off the fireplace?" "I don't know, but I want to find out." It took us most of that Saturday to work through it carefully. The plaster on that section was the same as the rest of the room, painted over twice. There was no obvious seam, no door frame, no hinge. But when I got a pry bar into the corner where the wall met the baseboard and put gentle pressure on it, something shifted. Not much, maybe a quarter inch, but it shifted. We spent another hour working the baseboard away from the wall until we could see that the wall panel itself was mounted differently from the surrounding plaster. It was sitting in a groove, not nailed. When we applied steady lateral pressure from the left, the whole 4x8 section slid sideways on what turned out to be a set of wooden tracks mounted to the floor and the ceiling joist. Old tracks, worn smooth, which meant they'd been used before, many times, before they'd gone still for however long this room had been hidden. The panel slid back about 2 feet before it stopped. The gap it revealed was dark and smelled like cool stone and something else, something I couldn't name at first. Old metal, like the inside of a safe. I got a flashlight. The room behind the panel was small, maybe 4 by 8 feet, the same dimensions as the sliding wall. The ceiling was low, about 6.5 feet. The walls were bare concrete block, not the same construction as the rest of the house. Newer, I thought, added deliberately. On the right wall, someone had built a set of wooden shelves. Most of them were empty or held only dust and the desiccated husks of a few insects. But on the bottom shelf, pushed back against the wall and covered with a piece of oilcloth, was a metal strongbox, the kind with a latch and a padlock, old but not corroded. Whoever had put it here had been careful about moisture. On the left wall, someone had bolted a small metal rack, the kind used for hanging files. It held 8 manila folders, each one sealed with a rubber band that had dried out and cracked, but still held its rough shape around the folder. Claire and I looked at each other in the narrow space, with the flashlight throwing shadows up the concrete block walls. "Do we open it?" she asked. This was not a small question. We both felt that. "We open it," I said. The padlock on the strongbox was a combination type. We tried it for a while without success, and then I got a bolt cutter from the truck and cut the shackle. Inside the box were 2 things: a smaller waterproof plastic case, the kind used for camera equipment or survival gear, and a handwritten note on a piece of yellow legal paper. The note said, in careful block letters, "If you found this and you don't know what it means, find a lawyer before you do anything else. If you do know what it means, Theodore Whitfield sends his regards." The name hit me before I understood why it hit me. Theodore Whitfield. I'd heard that name. I just couldn't place it. Inside the plastic case were 2 items: a USB drive, old but sealed in a small Ziploc bag, and a single laminated card with a handwritten 10-digit number on it. The manila folders on the wall rack contained paper documents, printed pages, some handwritten, organized by what appeared to be date ranges spanning from 2003 to 2011. I pulled one folder and flipped it open carefully. The pages were financial records, transaction logs, property transfers, names and numbers and dates laid out in columns, with a precision that felt deliberate, almost prosecutorial. I recognized one of the company names on the first page I looked at: Meridian Bridge Holdings. I'd seen that name on job sites. More specifically, I'd seen it on the signage outside of several commercial developments in central Ohio over the years. Mixed-use buildings, a retail strip, an industrial park out near Groveport. They were a real estate development company. Mid-size, by the look of them. Not a household name, but present. I'd always assumed they were a legitimate regional developer. I looked at the transaction logs more carefully. The numbers being moved through the property transfers in these documents were not mid-size. They were 8 figures, some of them 9. I closed the folder and sat down on the concrete floor of that small hidden room with the flashlight between my knees. "We need to call a lawyer," I said. On a Saturday? Claire said. First thing Monday, I said. And we don't tell anyone about this between now and then. The lawyer's name was Miss Hartley, a friend of a friend, a woman who did mostly real estate and contract work, but had enough connections to know immediately that what I was describing was outside her lane. She listened to the whole thing over the phone Monday morning, asked 3 or 4 questions that told me she'd been paying attention, and then said, "Don't touch the USB drive. Don't make copies of the documents. And don't talk to anyone from Meridian Bridge Holdings or anyone connected to them about anything for any reason. I'm going to give you a number to call." The number was for a former federal prosecutor named Mr. Ainsley, who now worked in private practice with a specialty in financial crimes. He was in Cincinnati. We drove down that Wednesday with the strongbox, the folders in a sealed plastic bin, and the USB drive still in its original Ziploc bag. Mr. Ainsley's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, overlooking the Ohio River. He was a thin man with a neat gray beard and the particular kind of stillness that I associate with people who have spent a lot of time in courtrooms. He spread the documents out on a long conference table and went through them methodically, pausing occasionally to make a small mark in a notepad, not saying anything until he'd looked at everything. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at us. "You need to understand what you potentially have here," he said. "And you need to understand that once you understand it, you can't ununderstand it. So I want to ask you once, are you sure you want to know?" Claire reached across the table and took my hand. "Tell us," she said. What he described over the next 2 hours was this. Meridian Bridge Holdings had been used, for at least a decade, as a vehicle for laundering money through real estate transactions. The shell of the operation was legitimate. They really did develop properties, really did build buildings, but layered inside the legitimate business was a systematic scheme for cycling funds through property purchases and resales, inflating and deflating valuations on paper, using a network of LLCs and nominee buyers to obscure the origin of the capital. The documents in those folders, if they were what they appeared to be, were an internal record of those transactions maintained by someone inside the operation who had either kept them as insurance or was building a case. "Theodore Whitfield," I said. Mr. Ainsley looked at me. "You know that name?" It was in the box. A note. "Theodore Whitfield sends his regards." He was quiet for a moment. He typed something on his laptop and turned it toward us. It was an obituary from the Columbus Dispatch. Theodore Whitfield, age 61, who had died in 2014, survived by his daughter and 2 grandchildren. He had worked in commercial real estate and property development for 30 years. "He died before he could use it," Claire said quietly. "Or before he decided to," Mr. Ainsley said. "We don't know which. What we do know is that the property ended up in tax delinquency after his estate got tied up, and no one came looking for what was in the walls, which tells me whoever he was protecting himself from either didn't know the documents existed or didn't know where they were." The USB drive, once examined by a forensic data specialist Mr. Ainsley worked with, turned out to contain encrypted backup copies of all the documents, plus several additional files, emails, voice memos, and a spreadsheet cross-referencing the paper records with actual bank routing numbers and account identifiers. It was, in the measured language Mr. Ainsley eventually used in his filings, a comprehensive and self-authenticating record of approximately $340 million in laundered funds over an 11-year period. The man at the center of it was named Warren Galt. He was the founder and principal of Meridian Bridge Holdings, and, as it turned out, a reasonably prominent figure in Columbus's development community. I'd seen his name in the Business Journal. He'd spoken at a Chamber of Commerce event that my company had attended a couple years back. He wore good suits and was known for donating to a children's hospital. What the documents showed was that he had spent more than a decade taking money from sources the federal government took a serious interest in and cycling it through property transactions to make it look like ordinary development profit. When Mr. Ainsley brought the case to the attention of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, The USB drive's laminated card turned out to be the decryption key. The encrypted files opened. Everything Whitfield had documented matched. I want to tell you what the next several months felt like, because it's the part that people don't talk about when they tell these kinds of stories. It felt like waiting. Like standing on the edge of something that hadn't happened yet, and might not happen for a long time. We moved into the house in late spring. The roof was new, the electric was updated, the bathroom worked, and we had one finished bedroom and a livable kitchen. We slept on an air mattress for 3 weeks while the real bed waited in the garage because we hadn't finished the floors yet. Claire graded papers at a folding table. I worked on the house every evening until it got dark. We didn't tell our families what we'd found. We'd been instructed not to. Claire's mom called every Sunday and asked how the renovation was going, and Claire would describe the tile she'd picked for the bathroom and the color she was thinking for the bedroom walls, and none of it was a lie, exactly. But it felt like we were living inside a parenthesis that no one else could see. The FBI moved deliberately. That's the word Mr. Ainsley used, deliberately. There were asset freezes and subpoenas and depositions, and at some point a parallel state investigation got involved, and the whole structure of it was so dense and procedural that I mostly understood it only in summary form when Mr. Ainsley would call with an update. What I knew was this: Warren Galt had been building his operation for more than a decade and believed it was airtight. He had good lawyers and a long track record of clean-looking filings. What he didn't know was that a meticulous man in Fairfield County had spent years documenting everything and then built a hidden room in a house that he owned and put the documentation in a strongbox behind a sliding wall. Theodore Whitfield had died before he could deliver the package himself. We had delivered it for him. The case broke publicly on a Wednesday in October. I was on a job site in Gahana when Pete called me and said, "Turn on the news," and I pulled it up on my phone and watched a local news alert about federal charges against the founder of Meridian Bridge Holdings. 41 counts: wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. The amount cited in the indictment was $340 million. I had to sit down on a lumber pile and breathe for a minute. Claire texted me 2 minutes later. It happened. I wrote back. She wrote, "You okay?" I thought about it. Yeah, I wrote, "I think so," because Theodore Whitfield had documented the property he owned and the evidence he'd compiled as part of a clear intent to provide it to law enforcement. Something he'd detailed in a notarized letter found among his estate documents. Once investigators started looking, his estate had a claim against the asset, recovery from the Galt prosecution. That claim was complex and took time, but it resolved. His daughter, a woman in her late 40s who lived in Dayton and had no idea any of this existed, received a settlement that covered her father's original intent and then some. She called us. I hadn't expected that. She found our information through Mr. Ainsley's office and called on a Thursday evening while I was out in the backyard, working on the garden beds. Claire had decided she wanted along the south fence. She thanked us. She said her father had spent years carrying something he couldn't tell anyone about, and she hadn't understood, when he was alive, why he seemed so weighed down. She said she hoped we were okay. She said the house had been his favorite property. He'd bought it in the late 90s, before everything happened, back when he was still just a man who liked the idea of old houses and the quiet of the country. She said she was glad it had found the right people. I didn't know what to say to that. I thanked her. I told her the house was coming along well. She asked if she could see it someday, and I said yes, of course, anytime. The settlement that came to us was structured around the recovery of assets and a provision for material witnesses who had been central to the successful prosecution. It was not lottery ticket money. It was not generational wealth. But it was enough to finish the house the way we'd imagined finishing it, with some left over that went into a savings account that we'd been told before felt impossible to build. We put a new porch on the front of the house that summer, real pressure-treated lumber, with a swing on the south end and a pair of rocking chairs that Claire picked out from a craftsman in Lancaster. The oak trees that surround the property filtered the afternoon light in a way that I still wasn't entirely used to. Coming from a neighborhood of apartment buildings and parking lots, the quality of light here felt like something I'd been missing without knowing I was missing it. One Saturday morning in August, Claire was sitting on the porch with her coffee, and I brought mine out and sat in the other chair, and we just sat there for a while, listening to nothing in particular. A woodpecker was working on something in one of the sycamores out toward the lane. The grass needed cutting. The kitchen still needed new cabinet hardware. "Do you think about him much?" Claire asked. "Whitfield? Yeah, I thought about it. Sometimes. In the house, mostly." She nodded. "Me too, especially in the main room. I'll be grading papers and I'll just think. He sat in here. He built that sliding wall with his own hands. He was protecting something he couldn't carry by himself." "He was waiting for the right time," I said. "Or the right people," she said. I didn't argue with that. I don't know what Theodore Whitfield would have made of us. A site supervisor and a fourth-grade teacher who couldn't afford Columbus rent anymore and ended up in his house because nobody else bid high enough. I don't know if he had a plan for us or if we were just an accident that worked out. What I know is that we came to this property with nothing but the intention to make something livable out of something broken. We pulled up the ruined carpet and found the original hardwood floors underneath. We stripped the peeling paint off the kitchen cabinets and found they were solid wood, old growth, better than anything you could buy now. We tore out the collapsed ceiling in the back room and found hand-hewn rafters that dated to the original construction, still sound after 60 years. And in the wall beside a hand-laid stone fireplace, we found the one thing that a man who had spent years inside a corrupt system had trusted to survive him: the record. The full, documented, cross-referenced truth of what had happened. He had hidden it as carefully as he could and left a note that said, in 11 words, everything that needed to be said. Find a lawyer before you do anything else. We did. And the rest of it, the charges, the recovery, the Saturday morning on the porch with coffee and woodpeckers and grass that needs cutting, that's ours. We built it out of a house nobody else wanted. Out of 60 days and an auction listing that showed up at midnight on a phone screen while I couldn't sleep. Out of careful knocking on walls and a measurement that didn't add up and a flashlight in a small concrete room that smelled like old metal and time. The bad guys are in federal court. The truth is in the record. The porch swing needs a new bolt on the left chain, and I'll get to it this weekend. And the woodpecker is still out there, and Claire just called me in for breakfast. We're home.